some truck drivers, I think it was on social media, pointed out less studies and more parking. Truck parking has been an industry-wide problem across the nation for a long time now. So it really hit the federal government's radar back in 2012 with the Jason's Law, which essentially directs the Department of Transportation to look into the issue. Several studies have been conducted since. Some of those studies have opened door to new questions, which prompted more studies. But just recently, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration released its latest truck parking study. So with me to talk about that study is the principal investigator of that study, Jolanda Prozzi. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyson. Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, there have been, many truck parking studies over the years tackling different aspects of the issue. So what does this latest truck parking study look into specifically?
Yeah, thank you, Tyson. So in this latest FMCSA study, we tried to understand the use of truck parking facilities along two corridors, the I-80 and the I-94 corridor in Wisconsin. And so the idea behind this study was to understand how truckers first use the truck parking facilities. So when and where do they park at different times of the day along these two corridors? But then we really wanted to delve into understanding the benefits of using app-based technologies, such as the Park Unload app that we used in our study, to provide drivers with truck parking information in real time and at a very granular level. So, the app allows us to not only share with drivers that there's a few spots in the rest areas coming up, but it also provides the ability to direct drivers directly to where those free spots are in the rest area or in a truck stop.
Yeah, and I really want to talk about that specifically, the app, because I think I think the truckers would find that to be the more fascinating part of the study. But before we do, I want to get to the two other points first. You talked about the usage of those parking spaces. Again, this is the I-94, I-80 corridors in Iowa, Wisconsin. So let's get to that part first. So what did the data reveal about the existing truck parking usage in the studied area?
So we partnered with the University of Wisconsin at Madison with Professor Ernest Perry from that institute, and they analyzed, or they captured the data from the TPIMS project. So we used that information to actually understand how rest area capacity is used. And, analyzing the data, and as we showed in the report, there's this typical pattern where in the evening hours, you see more trucks coming to the rest area, staying there, and then by 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, they start to leave the facilities again. What we did identify with the analysis of the data is that there's certain rest areas that that the demand almost always exceed the capacity. But then there are other facilities along the corridor where there are capacity available as well. So we did find that not all facilities along the corridor is filled to the complete capacity, every single hour of the night. And that, even in some cases when you would expect the facility to be at capacity, like 1 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, there are spaces available, which for us means that the information about the availability of these spaces is potentially lacking.
Sure. And so with that being said, the study looked into unauthorized parking. So
Mhm.
what did you see in terms of trucks parking where basically they're not supposed to?
Yeah, so we had a small data set that we acquired, and what we saw, which was super interesting, was that at these facilities where the demand for truck parking already exceeds the capacity of the spaces, we saw a lot of drivers parking on the exit and entry ramps to those facilities. So that's information I think that's super helpful in understanding where drivers want to park.
Sure.
So we also found that in along those two corridors, when truckers parked in an, call it an unauthorized location, it tended to be on the entrance and exit um, ramps of facilities that's already like at capacity or over capacity
Sure.
in terms of
And,
usage.
and you mentioned TPIMs, and just to clarify for anyone watching, so that's the Truck Parking Information Management System. That's being deployed in, I believe it's 8 Midwestern states. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So that being said, I really would like to spend the rest of the time talking about the app, because I know that
Mhm.
there's a lot of industry outreach heading into this study. I know that we've even reported on it back in July 2022 to kind of get
Yeah,
people
thank you.
to participate in this. And so now here we are. The study's been completed. We have the results, and I think the most interesting part of the study to the truck parkers will be this. So, I mean, can you just really briefly summarize what this pilot program was doing?
Yeah, sure. So we worked with the Iowa DOT and the Wisconsin DOT. And so, I will always give a big shout out to Iowa and Wisconsin
Sure.
for allowing us to pilot this app at their rest areas. We reached out widely to
Yeah.
the public and the private sector in order to get these test beds, and Iowa and Wisconsin was willing to go on this journey with us. But in essence, what we did is we tested the app at 4 parking spaces in 9 rest areas along these 2 corridors, 6 rest areas along I-80 in Iowa, and then 3 rest areas along I-94 in Wisconsin. And so, I can take a step back and just explain the working of the app. But basically, it's a super low cost technology. A Bluetooth transponder is attached to a parking sign that designates or that covers a certain area of the rest area. So in our cases, we tested 4 parking spaces. This Bluetooth technology sends out a ping, and the truck driver is required to download the app on their phone. And as soon as this app connects with this, receives this ping, the app knows that where the driver is. And so for the driver to park, he just clicks the button to say that he has arrived. He checks in, and then the space is considered occupied, and that information is shared with all the drivers that have downloaded that technology. So they will know of those 4 spaces, 1 has been occupied.
Okay. So that's what I want to talk about, because that's
Mhm.
where I was kind of confused on the information availability part of it. So yeah, a trucker
Mhm.
comes in, shows up to the spot. He basically checks in. and now that spot has been occupied. And you mentioned, and the study mentions that other truckers will be able then therefore be able to see that that spot is occupied. So I guess the question that I have, and maybe this is where I'm confused about the app,
Mhm.
is that um, you know, how do other truckers see that information? Because as you mentioned, this app basically is Bluetooth enabled, and in order
Mhm.
to connect to a Bluetooth, you got to be within, I think the study said, within about a 40-meter range or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
when you go to the app, I mean, could a truck driver, say, who's 5, 10, 15 miles away, be able to tap into that data, or would that truck driver would have to be physically at the location? As that, do you understand that the question
yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
So
how does that work?
so it works, I didn't design the app, but I'm
Sure.
going to do my best to explain to you. But so once you've logged into the app, all 9 the rest areas where we tested the technology, the availability of the spaces can be seen on the app. So there's a Internet of Things capability attached to the app. And then when you click on the rest area, so for example, you're interested in, you're like 4 hours away and you're trying to see if there's a space at Gainesville, for example, where
Sure.
we tested the app, then it will show 3 spaces available or 1 space available, or all spaces are occupied. So that was the that is, technology is developing very fast, and so we're super excited about this app because it also has the capability that you can that you can reserve a parking space as well. So I mean, to answer your question, and maybe I'm rambling a little bit,
Okay.
is that the technology has the ability to provide this level of granular information at the space level. And drivers don't have to come along the corridor and look at a TPMS board to see the availability of the spaces. They can see long before they arrive whether the spaces are available on the
Okay.
app.
Yeah, because I was just going through it because I downloaded the app was Park Unload,
Yes,
and
yes,
so I,
yes.
I downloaded the app, and I couldn't see anything on my end, but I don't know if that's because of the pilot program has ended and therefore they've ended
Yeah,
that. So I figured
yeah,
that probably would be the case. But so yeah, I was trying to understand that because the study also mentions that there was a major hurdle here, and that one of the hurdles here was the lack of truck drivers, using the technology. There was a lot of outreach,
yeah,
you all did your due diligence on that part, but regardless, truck drivers just weren't using the app. And so there's kind of like an issue. It's like, are truckers using these apps? And so that's something that you kind of found in your study, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, it was very interesting because, as you mentioned, we did a lot of outreach in the beginning. We were on site talking with truck drivers long before we started the pilot, or before we started the pilot. We used outlets like yourself to communicate information about the pilot. We went on many trucking shows where we talked
Mm.
about the project. We had flyers that we distributed. We had flyers in the rest area. We worked with the trucking associations. We shared information with the trucking associations. We used social media, both paid and unpaid. Um, but it's difficult to gauge how many truckers first received the information, and then secondly, how many were willing to participate in the pilot. We had several hundred download the app. Most of them were one-time users. They used it once, but they didn't use it on a consistent basis. some drivers told us it's because they are, they don't use these corridors on a regular basis. One thing that for me was also very interesting about this study is that when you looked at the social media responses that we got to the pilot project, it was overwhelmingly negative.
Shocker, right? On social media.
But then, when we talked to the truckers at the rest areas, and and when we surveyed the truckers that use the app, we had a more positive response. But it's difficult to exactly say why why we couldn't convince more truckers to use the app. But some of the comments that we received back was, first, it was just a pilot study.
Sure.
So there was a reluctance maybe there to commit to the app. And then secondly, which was a very interesting insight that that was shared with me. I was making a presentation on this study at a FMCSA gathering, and there was truckers that participated or attended that gathering. And one of the drivers came up to me and she said that she understands the value of the app and she understands the benefits of an app. But boy, oh boy, it's just another app that she needs to download.
Yeah.
And she already has an app for
Right.
so many other services. And it was just another app. And her worry was that if every DOT comes with its own app or every rest area comes with its own app, how many apps would she have to download? So there is that. That I would mention it because that was a concern that was.
Yeah, and that was kind of where I was going to go with that as well, because you mentioned it was 4 spots at 9 different rest areas. That's very limited in scope. And so if you're a truck driver who's trying to look for all of your available options, that's just not going to be enough, And so, there's a lot of truck parking apps on the market that have blown up in popularity in the past couple of years. I know like Truck Parking Club is one of them that shows a more comprehensive list. And I think truck drivers find that more helpful because you have all of the options there. Whereas something like parking or park on load, very limited in scope, so you're narrowing down the options, and I think that's probably what part of that concern was. And back to the truck parking information management systems in those 8 Midwestern states, I know that they communicate that information through the digital signs along the interstates, but there's no centralized app, for example, for that. And I think that kind of goes back to the concerns that truck driver is telling you. It's like, if there was an app that showed all that information in all of those 8 states in one place, that would be one thing. But you have to have, 8 different state DOT apps. That's, as soon as you cross state lines, you're going to have to, switch your apps, and that could be a problem. So I don't know if that's something that's, that could be studied, future studies, how we can, collect all this data into a centralized database. But yeah, I did find that interesting that, there was the negative feedback on social media, but positive feedback in person. I think the truth maybe somewhere in the middle there, more than likely, But overall, from everything that you learned about the app and the usage and the unauthorized parking, like what was your biggest takeaway from this study?
Well, my biggest takeaway from this study is that the study definitely confirmed the need for long-term parking, which I think by now is a no-brainer. what was interesting for us is that it also highlighted the need sometimes for short-term parking, especially in these overnight hours when the rest areas are just completely full, or it highlighted the need for, some drivers drive at night, and they may need to use the rest area for, just because they have to go.
Sure, right.
or they need to break for that 30 minutes, and where do they park in order to use that facilities. And I think that's maybe an area where we haven't paid too much attention. So that's definitely a need. But I think for me, one of the biggest lessons here is that there are still capacity available. Maybe not enough to get every truck driver in a safe spot. I don't
Sure.
say that, there's enough truck parking spaces, because we know there's not. But there are spaces available, and the information is just not available to the driver, or they don't know where that space is, and therefore they cannot not park there. And I do think some of these app-based technologies are a worthwhile investment. I think the challenge is to figure out how to get the information or to the most truckers, and how to get a very large share of the drivers to use the
Yep.
technology. I think that is the challenge, because it's very low cost compared to building rest areas. And you want to be able to use, maybe not all, but at least 99% or 98% of the capacity that's available. I mean, I'm just taking a number out of my head, but you want to use the capacity that is
Right.
available.
And your study actually showed, like, even when it came to overnight parking, which was the most used part of the day, I think what at most, like, capacity was around high 70s, maybe high
Mhm.
70%, maybe low 80%, but it was never in the 90%, even
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
even in the peak hours. It was so there was always space available, at least one or two. So
Yeah, on average, yeah,
on
on
average,
average.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, that being said, obviously, I think a big problem here then that this study kind of highlights is the lack of information being communicated to the truck driver. So obviously, that's not going to solve the truck parking problem, but that would at least, would you say, it'd be fair to say that that would at least mitigate the problem to a significant degree?
Yeah, it will help to
Yeah,
address the problem of the truckers not having access to safe parking. It will not eliminate the
sure.
problem. That's I think that's clear, but it would help, and I think every little initiative, or anything that helps is a good, it's a
Oh,
step in the right direction.
absolutely, yeah. And the only comment that I'd make, as far as the communicating that information, as the study showed, truckers weren't too quick to pick up on the app. And again, as that truck driver told you, I think if there was a more centralized database, like a
Mhm.
one-stop shop of an app, I think truck drivers would be very, I think that would be well more received by truck
Mhm.
drivers, and then and then that information gets to them, and then, yeah, hopefully we'll see a higher percentage of that usage. But I guess
Mhm.
that's a different problem for somebody else. But your research,
Yeah.
at least quantifies that problem for future app developers to kind of look at. It's like, oh, there perhaps is a market here, because this study definitely shows that. So
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
definitely good to see, and it definitely shows why these studies can be important. Sometimes it can, I know the study actually mentioned this, how at least guide maybe the private sector to maybe
Mhm.
to develop the technology or the app that would communicate this information
Mhm,
for the most part.
mhm.
So I don't know, just a little comment there. So anyway, that being said, I you kind of covered all the stuff that I want to get into. Is there anything else that you want to mention that I might have missed about this study, or other truck parking issues?
Um, well, no, I think it was a good discussion. Thank you for having me. But I always, want to thank the FMCSA for, of course, funding this study. Brian Rothier was the project manager at FMCSA. And then I need to say always a special thanks to Phil Mesher and of the Iowa DOT and Tom Dewitt of the Wisconsin DOT that went on this journey with us. It's a study. It provides information. We proved that the concept is working. We proved that the technology is there. It's now for others to take it to the next step. So.
Great. Well, again, I appreciate you talking with me, and I appreciate your work
Well,
you do.
thank you.
Yeah. So
Thank
yeah.
you, Tyson.